This is a video response to Thea Warner's video, The Moral Argument and the Existential Argument. The moral argument comes from Kant in his book, The Critique of Pure Reason, under the section of the ideal of the summum bonum as a determining ground of the ultimate end of pure reason. I personally reject his philosophical framework, but his argument is still worthwhile to consider.
The word illusory here comes up. But so not God. We can unpack that a little bit further. A moral theory that places morality within something like a social contract, for example, is an example of not God. And Craig would say that social contracts are arbitrary or just matters of opinion. And he would say illusory, so not real. And so thus analyzed, it seems to me that the moral argument comes down to a basic attack on all moral theories, all understandings of morality, except for those moral theories that depend on God.
What's important here in the term objective is not it's God's existence. It is necessity. In the moral law, there is the necessity of what we ought to do to deserve happiness. This law we know of independently of the sense experience because, and I quote, morality regards only the freedom of a rational being and the necessary conditions under which alone this freedom can harmonize with the distribution of happiness according to principles. And if you've read Kant, you know that necessity cannot come from sense experience, but is a priori. And this is the form that moral law comes to us as necessary laws, not arbitrary. So Kant asks this question with this background. If I conduct myself so as not to be unworthy of happiness, may I hope thereby to obtain happiness? The reason he asks this question is because that is ultimately the end of acting morally, to obtain happiness. If we ought to act towards that end, then we should rightfully hope that this kind of end is fulfilled. As Kant said, just as the moral principles are necessary according to reason in its practical use, so it is equally necessary according to reason in its theoretical use to assume that every one has ground to hope for happiness in the measure in which he has made himself worthy of it in his conduct, and that therefore the system of morality is inseparably, though only in the idea of pure reason, connected with that of happiness. So if we're going to take morality as true, whether practically or really, to obtain the end must be a possibility given that our actions in accordance with the system of morality. Otherwise, morality would be nonsensical and without a point. So how does this entail that God exists? According to Kant, since the moral law is binding on each individual in the use of his freedom of volition, even if others should not act in conformity with this law, neither the natural things nor the causality of actions and the relation to morality determine how the consequences of these actions will be related to happiness, and the necessary connection of the hope of happiness with the unceasing endeavour to become worthy of happiness cannot be cognized by reason if we take nature alone for our guide. This connection can be hoped for only on the assumption that the cause of nature is a supreme reason which governs according to moral laws. The whole course of our life must be subject to moral maxims, but this is impossible unless the moral law, which is a mere idea, reason connects an efficient cause which ordains to all conduct, which is in conformity with the moral law, an issue either in this or in another life, which is in exact conformity with our highest aim. Thus, without a God and without a world invisible to us now, but hoped for, the glorious ideas of morality are, indeed, objects of approbation and admiration, but cannot be the springs of purpose and action, for they do not satisfy all the aims which are natural to every rational being, and which are determined a priori by pure reason itself and necessary. You should at least be able to see that moral actions require an act towards an end, and that end ultimately is happiness. For that end to come about in reality, an order in reality apart from us must exist which is directed towards that ultimate end. That requires something which an atheist cannot really account for, a purposeful act towards an end from the beginning of the universe, and all call this God. This is basically the same argument as the teleological argument, but it starts with morality to show that there must be order in the universe towards an end. I should also point out that Kant does not require that we have proof of morality existing objectively. In fact, Kant would argue that we do not have such a proof, but he takes morality pragmatically. Because moral law tells us what we ought to do to be happy, we must accept it pragmatically if we are to become happy. I would encourage you to read the primary text as well, as I may have missed something important which you may find useful. I think you are right to tie this in with the existential argument because they both have to do with our end. I do not know what the origin of this argument is, so I can't say if there's a better formulation or not. Craig seems to be saying that there isn't any ultimate end in the atheist view, by which he means a purpose for the universe. He's not saying that we cannot have a purpose ourselves, but that there cannot be a purpose in the ultimate schemes of things. I don't think it has anything to do with eternity besides the fact that God is eternal and that we end up having eternal life after death. He affirms that there can be a relative purpose, but in context there is no ultimate purpose. So why should we believe that there is an ultimate purpose for the universe? It seems that this is where the moral argument could be actually used to argue for an ultimate purpose, as Kant does above. I don't think this is how Craig goes about to argue this point, but to be honest, I'm not really interested in what Craig argues anyway, so I'm just going to end the video here. Thanks for watching.